Good evening and welcome to Newsmakers. I'm your host, Tiffany Meyer. America under assault, and we seem to be looking the other way. The Chinese Communist Party is buying up more and more of our property and agriculture. They're actively stealing trade secrets. They're spying on millions of Americans via TikTok. They failed to take a meaningful stance against Russia's invasion of Ukraine and instead increased Russian oil imports. Plus, they're taking more aggressive actions towards Taiwan. And now they're flying spy balloons over the United States. These are not friendly actions or actions of a country that wants peace. And yes, the CCP claimed it was a weather balloon and wasn't spying. But here's Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder.
I can assure you this was not for civilian purposes. That is, we are 100% clear about that. Based on what we know and have observed about this balloon, it is a surveillance balloon. It was an intelligence collection capability.
China, meanwhile, still maintaining it was a civilian balloon that had drifted off course and that the U.S., quote, overreacted in shooting it down. The Chinese regime going so far as to threaten to respond in kind. As for what that might look like going forward and how best we should respond, we have a full lineup of experts here tonight to help break it down. Joining us now to discuss the increasing provocation we see from China is Gordon Chang. Gordon is the author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiffany.
On Twitter, you said that both Canada and the United States military failed to defend their airspace regarding the Chinese spy balloon. Can you expand on that?
Simple. January 28th, this balloon entered the U.S. Air Defense Identification Zone, and it wasn't shot down until Saturday. It had 8 days transversing the United States and Canada, and along the way, it was surveilling extremely sensitive military sites. So I think that it's apparent that we didn't defend ourselves.
And Gordon, so what should America's first response should have been?
First response would have been to shoot it down as soon as it crossed into territorial U.S. airspace, and that would be by the Aleutians, and that would have been on January 28th. This balloon was maneuverable, and clearly the Chinese were actually directing its path.
And despite that, China is still saying it's a weather balloon, right? But we're getting conflicting reports out of our own Defense Department. At the beginning saying, oh, it's not hostile, it's just a balloon, and then saying, but it is different from previous ones. So why all these different messages coming out?
Well, first of all, China lies. So clearly that's the reason why they're telling us it's just a weather balloon. But even if it were just a weather balloon, Tiffany, drifting into the United States, we have every right to shoot it down. Because that's our territorial airspace. That's exactly what the Chinese would do. And matter of fact, the Chinese have a propaganda film from a couple of years ago about shooting down a foreign balloon entering Chinese airspace. So whatever it was, we had the right to do it, and the Chinese should stop lying about this.
And so speaking of shooting the balloon down, the Biden administration did finally shoot it down, but not before the balloon had flown thousands of miles over the United States. So what message does that send to China?
Well, first of all, China got a very good look to see how we deal with intrusions, but it shows that there was confusion and disarray in the Pentagon and also probably in the Biden administration itself. But depending on when the president first heard about it, but there are reports that he did not hear about it until the 4th day of this intrusion, which would indicate that the military is not prepared, at least mentally, to deal with China. We have a lot of capabilities, but they mean nothing if we don't use them. And for those 4 days, the president, who's commander-in-chief, was not briefed about this. If that is indeed the case, and the president, I assume, is telling the truth, then we've got a real problem in the Pentagon.
And given that we did finally shoot it down, China is still saying it's a weather balloon and it's not happy about it. So how is the Chinese regime likely to respond or retaliate?
That's a great question. And on that one, I think we have to say only time will tell. But I don't think that China's going to do anything because it is such a brazen lie that I don't think that they are in a mood to do that. But we've got to remember that the Chinese political system is in turmoil, which means that Xi Jinping has incentives to do things that can take us by surprise. And if he wants to create a controversy, a provocation, leading to a crisis for his own domestic political reasons, then he will do that. And so we'll just have to wait and see how far he's willing to push this.
And it seems in terms of China's military, the PLA, there have been public papers coming out how they're actively advocating for the use of these balloons and special aircraft. So are we expecting more balloons in the future, or what do you think?
China has a very big balloon fleet, which they do use for surveillance. And one of the possibilities is that Xi Jinping didn't know about this, that this was just the Chinese military doing this on its own, which is not impossible because the military there has become politically powerful. And some people think that it has been so powerful that it can tell, for instance, Xi Jinping what to do. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but that is something that we cannot rule out. And if indeed that is the case, it means that there is intense infighting at the top of the Communist Party and that Xi Jinping is not as strong as everyone thinks him to be. The one thing about the Chinese regime, Tiffany, is that it is opaque. We know less about it than we did, for instance, 3 or 4 years ago, which means that at this point, we can't rule out options of alternative explanations.
And Gordon, speaking of politics, turning now to the U.S. side, what are your thoughts on how President Biden addressed the issue of China, or didn't, in his State of the Union speech?
Well, he certainly hurried over China, and he did not make a direct reference to the balloon. He just mentioned, we'll defend our sovereignty. I think that was certainly insufficient given the nature of this provocation and also how close it was to the State of the Union address. So I don't give him high marks for doing that. He had an opportunity to say something which is critical and which I believe he must say, and that is the Chinese are preparing for war. This was a warning to us, and we must prepare for war as well. We've got to match the Chinese mobilization. I know that most people will think that's too drastic, but we Americans are very good at being oblivious as to what our enemies are saying. And we did not pay attention to Osama bin Laden until one day he killed 2,977 Americans.
Well, Gordon, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tiffany.
And coming up after the break, we're joined by former Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. He's here to discuss more on the Chinese spy balloon and the possibility that military generals withheld intelligence from Trump during his presidency.
Everything that's reported on television isn't always true, but it should be. NTD, the power of truth. Now available 24/7 on television and streaming platforms.
NTD's Capital Report. It's about getting answers, cutting through the fog of politics. It's about your questions and our chances to ask.
What is the net impact of the American Congressman Graves? Thank you for joining us.
We're speaking to those in power to find out what does this mean for the people. We're here so you're in the know.
Navigating a world of economic madness, you need to have the right guide. What do today's decisions mean for your tomorrow? We ask why. What's the alternative? Uncover the deeper reasons and the hidden influences, and highlight the real opportunities for profit. At NTD Business, we connect the dots for you. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. NTD Business. I'm Paul Green.
At The Nation Speaks, we don't just scratch the surface. We want to go wide and deep. our viewers come away with a much richer understanding of the issues of the day. We really make a big effort to bring on different voices onto the show. We don't just talk to experts and newsmakers, which of course are extremely important, but we also want to hear from the American people. So the people who are impacted by the policies and issues that we're talking about, because what they have to say is just as important to the national conversation.
Welcome back. About a week ago, Americans living in the western United States were greeted with a strange sight. A giant white balloon was floating over their heads, raising questions about what it could possibly be. Well, it turned out to be a Chinese spy balloon, and we were only told about it because people saw it floating in the sky. On top of that, reports have come out claiming that 3 Chinese balloons entered U.S. airspace during the Trump years. However, Trump and other top officials in his administration have said that if true, they were never informed and had no idea. Joining us to discuss all things Chinese spy balloon is former U.S. Congressman and chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes. Devin is now the CEO of Trump's Truth Social. Devin, thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you here again.
Great to be with you, as always.
So I want to zoom in on this balloon episode. As the former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, were you ever told about these 3 Chinese balloons during the Trump years? And if not, why do you think you weren't told about them? Why are we finding out about them now?
Well, I'm not sure we even have all the facts about this at all. So I guess the quick answer is no, I was not. But also, I'm not even sure what they're referring to. We've only heard some vague answers out of one of the military commanders. And none of us were briefed on the Intelligence Committee. In fact, I've heard from former Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, who, if anybody, he would have been briefed. And this clearly wouldn't have been hid from Congress. So my guess is that it didn't happen. And whatever they're talking about, they probably owe Congress a better explanation at this point, and the American public.
Devin, expanding on that, it seems former CIA Director and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has also said he had never heard about the spy balloons while in office, and he's calling the allegations about withholding information from Trump by military generals, quote, deeply dangerous. Do you think that military generals withheld information from Trump, or is this allegation a deflection by the Biden administration?
Yeah, I think the Biden administration is getting themselves in deeper. So clearly, if anyone in the military or the intelligence agency was withholding any information from the Trump administration, I agree with Secretary Pompeo, that would be a deep, dark, very dangerous place for the United States of America. But I just believe that they're making this up, really. So they're probably taking something that has maybe an ounce of truth, like maybe that, and I'm just speculating here, that maybe they caught something where the Chinese were experimenting, or they thought someone was experimenting. But the idea that this would have flown into U.S. airspace and we're just now finding about it later, I find that very, very hard to believe.
And one of the roles of the president is commander-in-chief, and it is his job to make decisions about military action. So what does it tell us if, and that's a big if, generals are withholding information from Trump when he was president?
Well, look, I think that would be a very dangerous place to go, but we have seen that, so troubling. So you can't rule it out entirely, although I think it's highly unlikely that the military and intelligence withheld things. But we have seen it in the Department of Justice and the FBI, where there was tremendous damage being done, tremendous lies being told by the DOJ and the FBI. For example, when it came to the Hunter Biden laptop from hell, that was coined as Russian disinformation, when in fact the leadership and everyone knew that that wasn't true. So there was where they took something that was not true, but on behalf of the Democratic Party acted like it was true and got Twitter, Facebook, and other social media sites to censor that story. They even got some 51 former high-ranking military intelligence professional to say that it was in fact Russian disinformation, when they all had to know that that Hunter Biden laptop was real. And now we know it's real because Hunter Biden's own lawyers have admitted that it's real.
And Devin, going back to the balloon, what are Trump's thoughts on that? Has he said anything about it to you?
Well, the only thing that he said it very publicly on Truth Social. And that was the very first day when this broke out in the news. President Trump put in very bold print on Truth Social, "Shoot down the balloon." And of course, it took, I don't know, 4 or 5 more days for the United States government to do what should have been done as soon as that crossed into the big open skies of Montana.
And we're hearing that Congress is planning to investigate the Chinese spy balloon and also look at the possibility that Trump wasn't briefed by his generals about these occurrences. And you led the Intelligence Committee. So what do you think Congress will uncover, and what, if anything, can they do about it?
Well, I think what they're going to uncover, if they can get their hands on the communications and the emails, is that this was a false and phony narrative meant to deflect in order to protect Biden. And in fact, I think if it wouldn't have been for the former retired reporter and the guy that had a Cessna that was into astronomy in Montana, had they not noticed that and then actually took some pictures of it, I think that the Biden administration was just going to let this balloon go on through and never going to say a damn thing, if you can believe that or not. And I think that ultimately what they were doing is they were desperate for a deflection, a new narrative, and that's why they created what they created.
And Devin, you mentioned how Trump said to shoot it down immediately, but in your opinion, why didn't Biden shoot the Chinese balloon down immediately?
Look, I think it's what I just said. I think they thought that this wasn't going to be discovered. When it was, then they didn't know what to do. Then they came out with this fake story. Oh, there were 3 balloons during the Trump administration. And of course, that was quickly proven as not true. And then they were going to look so pathetically weak, letting a known foreign adversary like China, whose goal is world domination, to let this balloon go over the entire United States of America, over our military bases, and then float off out into the Atlantic. I don't know where. I think they would have never shot it down.
Wow. Devin Nunes, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
And joining us after the break is Virginia's Attorney General, Jason Miyares. He's here to discuss what states are doing to protect against mounting CCP influence. Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is buying up American agricultural land and agricultural processes. It is flying spy balloons over the United States and has eyes into millions of American homes via TikTok. Suffice it to say, for a country that claims to hate America and what America stands for, the CCP is certainly invested in the United States. But that might be the entire point. Instead of waging war with guns, the CCP is waging war with cash, cold, hard cash. Recently, former President Trump, Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, South Dakota's Governor Kristi Noem, and several other high-profile Republicans have tried to raise awareness of the security risks posed by the CCP. But the federal government so far seems slow to act. So state governments are stepping up. Learn more about what measures can be taken at the state level. Earlier today, I spoke to Virginia's Attorney General Jason Miyares. Attorney General Miyares, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
National security is often seen as the responsibility of the federal government, but as the recent Chinese balloon episode has shown, states like Montana are very much at risk, and state officials have a big role to play. What's your take on the role of state officials, including those in your position, in protecting national security from threats like those of Communist China?
Well, I mean, I think what's happened with the balloon is a pattern where the Biden administration fails to be able to secure our borders, and now they're failing to secure our airspace. I thought it was incredibly troubling. I'm glad it got shot down. I think it took way too long to do so. But I think we all have a role to play. I mean, I say as the Virginia Attorney General, my role is I'm the people's protector, whether it's the victims of violent crime or protecting those from bad corporate actors. And that may include investigating some of our social media companies like TikTok and what the impact they're having on the mental health and impact of our children. And so I think state officials absolutely have a role to play in protecting their constituents at all levels.
And expanding on that, Attorney General, since taking office, you have made a priority of protecting your state from the threat of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, as you mentioned TikTok, but also fentanyl and human rights issues like forced organ harvesting. So tell us a little more about the measures you have taken and any further actions you plan on taking this year.
Well, as you know, that TikTok is a Chinese-owned company. We are conducting an investigation on their impact on our children. We know in China, they have a variety of restrictions on TikTok. They limit the age of who could be on there. They limit the amount of time that will cut off automatically. And at night, after 10 o'clock at night, it cuts off automatically across the country. That's the opposite of what we've seen here. And we have seen that TikTok has had an enormous impact on our children's mental health, social anxiety, and attention. And so we're investigating what exactly has been the impact of TikTok on our children, on fentanyl. It is chemical warfare. As you know, the chemicals being used by the Mexican cartels in fentanyl is coming and being imported from China. It is having a devastating impact on Virginians and across America. Enough people die from overdoses in America today that it's the equivalent of a fully loaded 727 crashing every day. And in Virginia, we lose four Virginians a day to overdoses. So we have pushed for legislation declaring fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. We are supporting law enforcement officials and their policies to go after these drug dealers that are lacing it. But at the end of the day, this is a lack of will by the Chinese Communist Party and allowing the export of all of these chemicals that are causing such death and destruction right now with so many families across America, and it's tragic.
And Attorney General, it seems more and more states are taking action, especially on TikTok. They're banning it on state devices and government devices. But it's not just TikTok, right? We're also seeing several states are either barring or looking into stopping the Chinese Communist Party and other foreign governments from buying or investing in our agricultural land. So how crucial is this local approach to countering the Chinese regime? And what role do you see it playing in the future of national security?
Well, we have seen Governor Youngkin in Virginia. He included this in his State of the Commonwealth address, that for national security reasons, he did not want to allow the Chinese Communist Party to be able to own lands in Virginia, particularly near sensitive military bases. We've seen that throughout the Midwest. We've seen that near some of our Strategic Air Command bases and locations, and that should trouble every single American. I think the Chinese balloon incident that we just saw woke a lot of people up to the idea that the CCP is actively seeking to spy and surveillance on Americans and American military installation and to collect information on Americans. That's one of our concerns about social media devices like TikTok, is what are the information that they are collecting on Americans and who are they giving it to? And as you know, there's really no separation. The idea of private ownership, private property rights in China is unheard of. You could be a private, independently owned company, but at any time, the CCP could come in and take away the company away from you, just like they did with Jack Ma, and they can order and direct them to turn over information. That should really, really concern every American. As we look and we see that this is a rival power right now that views the United States as a rival, and we need to wake up and be cognizant of that fact.
And you've said before that one of your mission statements as Attorney General is respecting the dignity of the individual. So how does your own family history in Cuba play a role in that?
Well, you know, I met with some dissidents, some Uyghur dissidents in America. We have a large community in Northern Virginia, and their stories are simply horrific. The arrest in the middle of the night, the obviously the organ harvesting, family members that simply had family members now back in China they don't hear from. They've gone completely dark, and unfortunately they're assuming the worst. And obviously my family story, where, you know, my mother experienced the horrors of living under an oppressive autocratic regime in Cuba. My uncle got arrested during the Bay of Pigs invasion. They took him away in the middle of the night. There's no trial. There was no sense of any type of individual rights. So respecting the dignity of the individual, I think, is a core value that we should all have as Americans, and realize that you have certain unalienable rights that can't be taken away from you just because the powers that be disagree with something you're saying, or you worship God maybe in a manner they disagree with. And I think that's such an important component of why America remains that last best hope on earth that people from all backgrounds, all faiths, all races, and all creeds want to come to, want to immigrate to. That's why America, at the end of the day, with this struggle with whether it's an autocratic dominated world order or a democratic world order, we're going to win, because people are attracted to what the United States have, which is we were going to respect you. You have rights we're not going to take away on a whim. You can worship God how you want to. You can speak out against the government. That's okay. That's what democracy looks like. Debate is healthy. And that's why at the end of the day, people want to live in a free and open society, not a closed dictatorship. And that's why at the end of the day, America's going to win.
Attorney General Miyares, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And coming up after the break, we're joined by constitutional attorney Jenna Ellis. President Biden just gave his second State of the Union address, and Jenna will give us her analysis after the break.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us.
There's reporting that can be trusted. There are programs that can inspire every generation. There is a television network worth watching and sharing. Our commitment is to bring you the facts and to show you the world. We won't be divided by politics, and we won't be swayed by the dollar. We believe in the strength of our nation and the hope in our shared humanity. We are NTD Television, and we are proud to bring you news you can trust and programs that make you smile. NTD Television, now available 24/7 on television and streaming platforms.
It's just clear as day. The media, whether it's broadcast, cable, or print media, has become extremely biased. And I started looking online for alternative ways to get information. And I saw an ad for a free trial. And I looked at it and I said, Epoch Times. I mean, come on, this is end of days type of stuff. I mean, what are they going to be talking about here? And I said, well, it's a free trial. Let me dig in. Is it giving me both sides? Is it giving me an objective point of view here? I have looked for opportunities to see where they might be biased, and I don't find it. It has given me a level of trust in media that I didn't think I'd ever get back. I love the Epoch Times because it has renewed my faith in the idea that a reliable, responsible, non-biased source of information is available. And I can say that I love it because of that.
Welcome back. Last night, President Biden gave his second State of the Union address, a speech many say sets the stage for his 2024 presidential run. Well, depending on your political leanings, his speech was either a resounding success or an outright flop. CNN called his message one of unadulterated optimism, even in the face of open hostility. While the former chief speechwriter to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo rated his speech a D and said, quote, "Hardly ever has a president said less in more than an hour of speaking than Joe Biden did tonight." Joining us to discuss Biden's State of the Union address and the GOP's rebuttal is Epoch Times contributor and constitutional attorney Jenna Ellis. Jenna also served as a senior advisor and counsel to President Trump. Jenna, thanks so much for joining us. Great to see you again.
Great to see you too.
So overall, what was your impression of President Biden's speech and the policies he touched on?
Well, of course, from the Republican perspective, it was a complete disaster, and there are a lot of reasons, objective reasons, that the Republicans are right. But from the Democrats' perspective, their goal here was to position Biden as ready and able to be the leader and the candidate to launch his 2024 campaign. And that goal, even for their side, was an utter failure because Joe Biden stumbled over his words. He got angry. He showed some classic signs of dementia and some mental failings. And he also failed very certainly to provide any sort of comprehensive unity with the whole audience just erupting at times with this kind of emotional reaction and anger toward the outright misrepresentations that his speech contained.
And Jenna, on the flip side, what did you think about the GOP rebuttal given by Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders?
Well, I love Sarah Sanders, and I think she's an excellent governor, and I know her personally through my work for President Trump. So I do have some bias there, but just from her presentation, I thought it was very measured. It was respectful. It contained a lot of true, genuine patriotism and optimism that you didn't see in Biden's rhetoric. And it also contained some forward-looking analysis of the future of America and really a contrast between what the Republican Party stands for, which is normalcy, legitimacy, and contrasting that from the Democrat position, which in her word was crazy.
And during Biden's speech, going back to that, Biden said several things that might be considered stretching the truth. One big one was that Republicans wanted to sunset Social Security and Medicare, but the Republicans called him out during his address, which is something we also saw happen under President Trump with the Democrats. So what are your thoughts on this approach? Is it appropriate to call out any president during a State of the Union? Your thoughts?
Well, the State of the Union has really become unmoored from its constitutional intent. Of course, this is a required address that the Constitution provides for, but really it's become in the modern era more of a PR speech that is an address to the nation, not information given to Congress. And so if you're looking at it from the modern medium, which is really just a television presentation, then I do think it is appropriate for the other side to be able to call out and fact check, or at least express an opinion in real time. What I thought was remarkable about last night that I don't recall ever seeing in a State of the Union address is for the opposition party in the Speaker of the House's position, as Kevin McCarthy was last night. So, of course, on camera with the president actually mouthing words like "that's not true" or "I disagree" in real time as the president speaking. And I thought that was actually very effective for McCarthy to do that.
And going back to earlier with Biden's speech being labeled a test run for his re-election campaign, if that's true, what did his test run tell you about Biden's campaign?
The DNC absolutely needs a new candidate. And I don't think that anyone, including the Democrats, genuinely have confidence. And certainly the approval polls suggest that the American people really don't either. But the problem for the Democrats is that they really don't have that deep of a bench. Certainly Kamala Harris has been an utter failure, and she is not well liked at all. And there's not really any other up-and-comers that the Democrat Party can really proffer, and they do have an incumbent. So they have a very difficult situation ahead of them with Joe Biden not yet having announced a re-election campaign, but reports are that he is poised to do that soon, and I think that the Democrats are facing a very difficult challenge.
And Jenna, you mentioned earlier how in the rebuttal, Governor Sanders was calling, this difference between normal or crazy, and that's between high taxes or money in your pocket, high gas prices and empty grocery shelves, or American prosperity, freedom, or government control. With all of these different things, do you think that's a fair depiction of both sides and what's happened under Democratic leadership?
Absolutely. And I think the winning message for Republicans headed into 2024, regardless of who gets the nomination, has to be that Republicans stand for normal, make America normal again, rather than the crazy leftists. If you look at the entire transgender movement, if you look at what Democrats are actually suggesting with partial birth or even after birth abortion, I mean, some of these policies, just in terms of reality, are not only unconstitutional, but they're also nonsensical, and they're also policies that simply aren't supported by the powers that the Constitution actually provides for the agents and the elected officers that the Democrats are proffering. So just looking at the content of Biden's speech and the Democrats' overall message, they are outcome driven, and they don't care about limited power. It is a huge contrast. And so I think that that is a very apt description. And that does need to be the Republicans' mantra heading into 2024, because that reflects, I think, a lot of even independent and moderate support that people want to come back to the normal America that we all knew and loved before the progressive liberal left started a lot of these policies.
Jenna, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks so much.
And coming up after the break, we're joined by Javier Palomares, who's here to give us his analysis of the economic policies President Biden promoted and prioritized in his State of the Union address. You don't want to miss what he has to say. Welcome back. At first glance, there didn't seem to be much bipartisanship on the economic front in President Biden's State of the Union address. In his speech, Biden called on Congress to raise taxes on billionaires, expand Medicare, and make the Affordable Care Act permanent, all of which are generally considered left-wing initiatives. At one point, he even went so far as to accuse Republicans of wanting to sunset Social Security and Medicare, an accusation which provoked one Republican congresswoman to yell at Biden and call him a liar. However, Biden also called for an increase in American-made products, specifically a new standard that requires all construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects to be made in America. This is something that both Democrats and Republicans seem to agree on. Joining us to give us his analysis of Biden's economic policies and what they may mean for the future state of our union is the founder and CEO of U.S. Hispanic Business Council, Javier Palomares. Javier, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you.
Thanks, Tiffany. Appreciate it.
Given the state of the U.S. economy, do you think President Biden took an appropriate tone when talking about the economy and what he's done for the Americans on this front? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think that he delivered a good speech. He forewent divisive language. He showed what I think was a genuine desire for bipartisanship and working toward, a prosperous America. He mentioned the jobs numbers, which are getting better, certainly. We're not even close to being done. But under his stewardship, our economy is showing signs of recovery. So he gets that win. He highlighted, by way of example, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which the USHBC was very, very happy to support. It will be a boon for the American small business community, and that's why we were delighted to support it. I think he took an appropriate tone. There's much work yet to be done, but I think it was a good start.
And Javier, as part of his speech, Biden called on Congress to pass worker-first initiatives, something he believes is necessary to build an economy that works for all, as you mentioned. He also said he wants to see an increase in American-made products. What are your thoughts on these policies and how they will impact American workers and businesses?
I was delighted to hear him talk about American-made products. We are strong advocates of bringing particularly manufacturing jobs back to the United States. With that said, I would have loved a bit more on the American small business community. I've had this discussion with President Biden. He knows that 2/3 of new jobs in this country are created by the small businesses, not the large conglomerate. So if those new jobs are to come back to America, it's very likely that it'll be the small companies that are creating these new jobs. I would have loved to have heard from him his thoughts about that. Any chance of a true economic recovery will have to engage America's small business community. We have to be at the table, and we stand ready to support this president or any president and inform a strategy for how we move forward as a country for the good of the economy and for the good of the American people.
Expanding on the bringing U.S. manufacturing home part, it has been a policy embraced by both the Trump and Biden administrations. And in a time when the country seems so divided, do you see America First policies such as this being a point of unity and a way forward, especially when Americans are suffering on the economic front?
Absolutely. When it comes to creating more jobs in America, we are 1,000% behind this administration or any administration. And again, it's very likely that it'll be America's small business community that creates these new jobs. This is definitely, I think, a point of unity. And I think it goes beyond politics. This is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. It's an American challenge. And we all need to come together and collaborate for the good of the economy, the good of the American people, and to figure out how we move forward as one.
And Javier, on the flip side, in the GOP rebuttal to Biden's speech, Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders was saying that Democrats are the party of high taxes, empty grocery shelves, and increased government control. Do you see that as a fair assessment? What are your thoughts?
First of all, shout out to Sarah, the state's first female governor. Our views could not be more different. I'm a Democrat. She's certainly a Republican. But I admire her, and I think she's done a phenomenal job of leading thus far. I certainly appreciate her perspective. I will say this, I think as it relates to the last point about government control, certainly President Biden has overregulated the oil and gas industry. But last night I saw him strike a conciliatory note. I saw him kind of turn a corner. He said that we would continue to need traditional oil and gas in this country for at least another decade. And that's a stark contrast from where he started. Remember, this is a man who, on his very first day as president, his first act was to shut down the Keystone Pipeline. And we all know what happened after that. In fact, America's small business community bore the brunt of that suffering, and we're still suffering through those decisions. But last night, I saw a glimmer of hope. I saw a man who turned a corner. I saw someone who was willing to change his position and to listen to the people. And to me, that was very encouraging. It remains to be seen where he goes from here. But again, that was an encouraging sign for me.
And Javier, zooming in on the businesses side, many American businesses are still suffering from issues caused by state and international lockdowns during the pandemic. Do you think this issue is receiving enough attention from the Biden administration and the U.S. Congress? And what more can be done to help these struggling businesses?
No, not at all. Not at all. And I'm glad you asked it. To be clear, America's small business community is still reeling from the after effects of COVID. We're still suffering from supply chain challenges, increased energy costs, high inflation. And on top of all of that, we're now seeing increased interest rates. There is potential still for a recession. We are beginning to recover, but this is the very beginning of a very tenuous recovery. So no, I don't believe the administration or Congress truly appreciates the challenges that our American small business community is facing. And again, we are the very backbone of the American economy. We create 2/3 of all new jobs in this nation. And the United States Hispanic Business Council, we advocate on behalf of the 4.7 million Hispanic-owned firms in this country that collectively contribute over $800 billion to the American economy. So, the only thing we're prouder of than being Hispanic is being Americans. And we applaud you and thank you because in today's Washington, if you don't have a voice, you don't get a choice. And oftentimes, America's small business community is not given a voice. So I thank you for giving us that voice.
Well, Javier, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. God bless and have a good night.
And coming up after the break, we're joined by Dr. Scott Atlas. Vaccines don't prevent transmission. COVID-19 is ending. So why are we still seeing things like vaccine mandates? And will that change under Republican leadership? Dr. Atlas gives us his analysis after the break.
The lasting beauty of realistic oil painting. Brilliant, expressive, and inspirational. The 6th NTD International Figure Painting Competition. Guided by pure authenticity, beauty, and goodness. Invites you to join us on a journey back to traditional art. The Gold Award is $10,000. For more details, please visit oilpainting.ntdtv.com.
Freedom is not free, and neither is the truth. In order to bring you the facts, our reporters are out there on the front lines getting the true story. Some of them served 10 years of prison in China. We've been censored on social media. Our Hong Kong printing offices were set on fire, and we've been repeatedly attacked by the Chinese Communist Party. But no matter what, we believe that you deserve the truth, and so we'll continue to bring the truth to light. Head on over to getepic.com and try honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. We'd love to have you on board.
NTD's Capital Report. It's about getting answers, cutting through the fog of politics. It's about your questions and our chances to ask.
What is the net impact of the American?
Congressman Graves, thank you for joining us.
We're speaking to those in power to find out what does this mean for the people. We're here so you're in the know.
Welcome back. The Republicans are in charge of the House, and they're already taking full advantage of that power. After 3 years of COVID-19 lockdowns, mandates, and controversy over pandemic rules, the Republicans are saying enough. Enough to the CDC push for more power, enough to vaccine mandates that don't prohibit transmission, enough to President Biden's COVID response, and they're not stopping there. They're using their newfound power by holding their first hearing on Biden's pandemic response today. Joining us to discuss all that and more is Epoch Times contributor, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution of Stanford, and former advisor for President Trump's White House Coronavirus Task Force, Dr. Scott Atlas. Dr. Atlas, thanks so much for joining us. Great to see you again.
Hey, great to see you. Thanks for having me.
So the House hearings on the pandemic response started today. What have we learned so far?
Well, I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg here. There's questions going on about mandates, about the vaccine data, about pharma ties. I think the way I see it, there are basically five areas that we need to focus on for the investigations. Number one, there was public health guidance that was massively incompetent at best and unethical at worst. And here I'm talking about things from both Trump and Biden administrations. It's not a political investigation. This pandemic was mishandled in 2020, 2021, and all the way through till today under the leadership at that point of Dr. Birx, who was the head of Trump's medical task force, Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Redfield, CDC. They lied to the public in many people's opinions about what was science or not for the masks, for lockdowns, for school closures, even though this was known for several years. Secondly, the NIH, the CDC, and the FDA failed and had massive conflicts of interest that were not really made aware of to the public. Why were the drug trials of FDA-approved drugs never done in the spring and summer of 2020? Why was the vaccine efficacy data distorted and never shown to the public? Why was emergency use authorization for vaccines that were experimental given without adequate clinical data, including for children who are, when healthy, do not have a significant risk from serious illness for the disease? What about the funding of gain-of-function research in China and the massive financial corruption with pharma by people who were actually advising the president, including people on the board of Pfizer specifically? Number three, the origin of the virus. Why is there a cover-up, in fact, a collusion with NIH-funded, NIH-dependent American scientists writing letters to scientific journals saying that anything saying that the virus wasn't natural was a conspiracy theory back in February 2020? That was a lie. There was also a collusion with the WHO. We were not allowed, as an independent nation who had massive death from this virus, to get transparency from China. The WHO has massive funding from China. The public needs to know about this. That's an investigation. Fourth, the vaccine failure. The public was lied to repeatedly by both CDCs of Trump and Biden about things like the efficacy in stopping transmission or in stopping infection at all. Okay, that was a lie. That data was known to be false. They didn't show the data. In fact, they lied or distorted data to achieve a behavioral goal. This is supposed to be a free society and, frankly, an ethical society. That's unacceptable behavior. And the fifth data point of needing investigation is censorship. And by the way, this is censorship inclusion with big tech and social media, but it's not just by the Biden administration, it's by the agencies during the Trump administration. The censorship on the media was most important during 2020, not the fourth quarter of 2021. I'm talking about 2020 when Twitter, Facebook, YouTube pulled down videos, including of myself, when I was advising the President of the United States because the big tech and their agencies in collusion, even in the Trump administration, were trying to stop the truth from becoming known to the public. So we have a lot of areas to investigate. It's going to take time. The problem with congressional investigations is that they're always either political or seen to be political because half the country doesn't like or doesn't approve of the other half. And so even in the best interest, it's going to be difficult to get to the truth, but the investigations need to be done.
And Dr. Atlas, with all these different areas, what do you hope to see happen regarding this?
Well, the first thing we need to know is the public needs to know the truth. The implementation of the policies that were advised by Birx and Fauci and then this administration were actually implemented. The lockdowns, the school closures, and that was pseudoscience. It was contrary to known data. The public needs to know that. The truth is very important in resetting public trust. The second thing is these people who gave that faulty advice and who were listened to are trying to rewrite history instead of taking accountability. So we need accountability and a public admission of error, or at least a public airing of the facts, because we need to restore truth. They have destroyed, and I'm talking about 2 administrations now, have destroyed public trust in agencies, in expertise in general, that we need as a functioning free society with diverse opinion. We need to have experts who actually don't lie or distort for political reasons. So the public admission and accountability of that needs to be done. And then third, we need reforms. We have a list of recommended reforms that I and others have come up with. We need to have a house cleansing. And by that, I mean, we need people in these career positions in the CDC, in the NIH, and the FDA to be fired and regenerated as entities that actually have people from outside who do not depend on career positions for their livelihood that come in for the public good, because the public good has been damaged by politicized bureaucrats with enormous power. And unfortunately, fourth, we need leadership class who understands they are elected to lead, not hide behind CDC or other unelected officials. When you're in charge, the bottom line is you don't use or elevate bureaucrats who are unelected to a position of authority, which again, we saw in 2 administrations. I want to make it clear, this is not just about failure of the Biden administration. These agency problems existed for decades, but certainly came to the fore in the Trump administration as well as the Biden administration. So it should be really both political parties want these investigations, but that's unfortunately not how this works in the U.S.
Well, Dr. Scott Atlas, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
That's all from us here tonight on Newsmakers. Be sure to tune in next Wednesday for a brand new episode. Until then, good night.